You're listening to Next in Education, the show where education meets real talk. We'll dive into the conversations working professionals are actually having and looking ahead at the future of education. This is where educators, leaders, and learners come to stay informed and inspired. This is Next in Education. What if I told you that 90% of a child's brain develops before the age of 5? That means the most critical years for learning, development, and well-being happen long before formal schooling even begins. Welcome to Next in Education, the podcast where we explore the ideas, people, and practices shaping the future of education. My name is Tom, and I'll be your host today. And in today's episode, we're exploring something that sits at the heart of every parent, educator, and community: raising thriving children. Joining me today is my co-host, Dr. Dalwinder Kaur, Program Leader for the School of Education at GlobalNxt University, bringing deep insight in early childhood education and educator development. Welcome, Dr. Dalwin.
Thank you, Tom. I am very excited because we all know that it takes a village to raise a child. So this topic resonates really deeply, and I'm excited to talk about children development and something really close to my heart largely because besides being an educator, I'm also a mother of a toddler, and I look forward to an exciting discussion.
So we're also joined today by our second guest, Janine Laubner, an experienced educator who has dedicated her career to understanding how children learn, grow, and develop in those early years. Janine, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
And just before we begin the actual podcast, for listeners inspired by today's conversation, applications are now open for our July intake for the Bachelor in Early Childhood Education at GlobalNxt University. We'll share more at the end of the episode about that. Let's get started. So, Janine, you come from a family of educators. Was there a moment early in your career where you realized that this is how I want children to learn and grow?
Yeah, definitely. I realized that while societies place a great deal of emphasis on high school and university outcomes, the actual foundations for those outcomes are built much, much earlier. As you said, the first 5 years of a child's life are incredibly influential in shaping how children learn, relate to others, and see themselves. I often think of it as the first domino in a chain reaction where we need to invest in this strong foundation in the early years because we really set children on a path that can influence the rest of their life.
Yeah, Janine, so you see, education has evolved a lot in the recent years. And so you're coming from a family of educators. I think you're the fourth generation, if I'm not wrong, right?
Yeah,
So I'm just
yes.
I'm just curious now, with a lot of changes that have happened in the last decade or so, how has that philosophy, I want children to learn and grow, has evolved over the years?
Yeah. So, I mean, just the fact that we're having this podcast right now and talking about early years just shows how people are starting to realize how important it truly is. So it's phenomenal that your university is offering this, and it's great that we can have these discussions because more and more research keeps coming out to support that these early years are critical.
That's really amazing. And, talk about how important these early years are in terms of obviously not just the children as well, but the parents. They also really like to focus on, milestones like counting, reading, or speaking early. But from your perspective, what does healthy development actually look like from birth to the age of 5?
Yeah. So look, healthy development it's broader than just traditional academic achievement. When I think about a thriving child, I think about a child who is curious, emotionally secure, physically active, socially connected, developing confidence in their own abilities. Between birth and 5, you really see that children are kind of building these foundations that really set the trajectory for later in life. Reading and counting, these are wonderful skills, but they are only just a small fraction of that development. The real question, I would say, would be, is the child developing the skills that they need to navigate life?
Right. So that's interesting. Okay. But the fact is that a lot of early childhood educators or a lot of parents these days are basically aware that their child developmental theories such as the Piaget, the Bandura, Erickson, and of course Vygotsky and so on. So a lot of them tend to use them as a measurement or lens to understand different child stages, and I'm sure they have blind spots as well. So from your perspective, Janine, what are some signs that a child is not only thriving academically or developmental wise, but a child is also thriving emotionally and socially?
Yeah, so I would look for, does a child show curiosity about the world? Do they form secure relationships with adults around them? Are they engaging in play with others? It could even be siblings. Are they expressing emotions that are developmentally appropriate for their age? Do they recover from moments of disappointment with little or no support? And, could they demonstrate independence when given the opportunity?
Mm. And from that, you talk about the kind of the academic side as well. Do you think there's sometimes that we overemphasize the academic side of that?
Yes, I mean, listen, research consistently shows that pushing formal academics too early, it doesn't necessarily lead to long-term better academic outcomes. What has been shown is that what predicts future success more strongly is social and emotional skills, self-regulation, resilience, language development, and executive functioning.
Executive functioning, that's something new to me. So you talk about executive functioning. Could you please walk us through what executive functioning really is?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So executive function, it's sometimes described as like the brain's air traffic control system. It basically means your ability to complete tasks. So it allows you to manage information, control impulses, achieve goals. And some of the most common executive functioning terms maybe that you're familiar with would be like self-regulation, attention and impulse control, working memory. So that would be your ability to handle directions or, two-step projects, cognitive flexibility, time management, initiation, planning, organization. All of these skills, we call them executive functioning skills, and they are most developed in early years.
So
Mhm.
they're not just limited to cognitive, but they're also emotional and so on. So that's basically a holistic development of a child, right? You spoke about the whole child, the thriving child, and you mentioned holistic as well. Can you just tell us how physical, cognitive, social, and emotional development are connected?
Yeah, absolutely. So holistic is a word that we hear all the time in early childhood education. And not a lot of people actually know what it means. So it does mean the whole child. So this is particularly important in Finnish pedagogy, where we are focusing on academics as well as well-being, the social and emotional skills. We give them equal weight. So I like to think of holistic as more like a web and less like a checklist.
And in any of those areas, if there's one particular area that compensates for a challenge in another, do you think?
Yeah, so what I see is we don't develop in isolation. Everything that we do, we're using multiple skills. And what I like to see is that parents tend to focus on the deficiencies. If a child is, let's say, struggling, possibly with math, what they end up doing is they end up getting a tutor and dividing a child's free time into devoting it to the tutoring and to teaching these deficit skills. So what I would say to do instead is to use your child's strengths and really let those flourish, really develop those, build your child's confidence, build their abilities, and then you can use that then to go ahead and try to tackle a particular deficiency in math using the skills that a child is naturally good at. So you have to get clever when it comes to capitalizing on what a child is naturally gifted at or curious or interested in.
Yeah, that's basically, I think, the eclectic approach, right? So when your child may be good at language and perhaps not so good at art, so you balance that out using the eclectic approach. So I'm just, the reality is that every parent or every early childhood educator is aware or they have heard of the phrase whole child development, holistic development. But in reality, that is actually very difficult, especially in this side of the world where there's overemphasis on the academic achievement from early age on. So parents start sending their kids, of course, to nursery, starting two, starting three, but then they start doing ABC, mathematics, one, two, three, numbers, and so on. So many parents or early childhood educators still focus primarily on academic development. And as our understanding of development evolves, of course, you spoke about the Finnish system. I'm interested to come back to that later, but there's also growing recognition that a child's emotional well-being, social skills, creativity, physical health are just as important, just like you said earlier. Now, could you tell us how should parents think of the whole child, and what are some practical shifts educators, especially educators, because they are helping parents nurture their children? So what aspects of child development should they be focusing on?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess the first thing would be that the goal isn't perfection in every single, learning area. So it would be for parents to just understand that their child has a unique profile and supporting the balance that will ultimately lead to their well-being. So especially in early years, focus on your child's well-being and less on any sort of deficiencies or any sort of academic challenges. Those can be caught up later, but the executive functioning skills that holistically help develop a child, those can be most easily taught in the early years through play.
That's really, really interesting. And kind of moving on to our next section now. So going back to the phrase you talked about earlier, executive functioning, we're going to be looking at that in early childhood now. So Janine, you've already kind of discussed what that actually means.
Yeah.
It's really, really intriguing. And you said that's a really, big topic recently in early childhood education. So from your perspective, why do the early years matter so much for developing these skills?
Yeah, well, they matter because these skills can be learned. So this is both the good news and and the bad news. So the good news is that you can learn these skills. Even if you're deficient now as an adult, you can go back and you can practice these executive functioning skills, and you can basically train yourself and exercise yourself the same way you can exercise yourself in the gym, you can exercise your brain. But the 0 to 5 is where we see this rapid growth. And I think most parents, they probably see it how their child is able to learn language very quickly. We see this with bilingual children, trilingual children. How are they able to do this? Because of the neuroplasticity in their brain. So they're rapidly growing and they're learning how to basically navigate the world around them. And when we talk about a child holistically developing, giving your child the opportunity to play is really essential, because play is fundamental for developing these executive functioning skills. It just happens naturally.
Uh, a very genuine question. Is it too late for parents to nurture executive functioning after 5?
No, absolutely not. Some effective strategies that parents can do right now is start setting up predictable routines. So try to have the same routine on the weekends, try to have the same bedtime routines, give your child opportunities to have imaginative play. Uh, Give your child opportunities to make choices, whether it's what's for dinner, what they want to wear, some games that you can play with children that will help them with working memory and self-control would be like Simon Says, red light, green light, musical chairs, having conversations with children that encourage problem solving, asking them, oh, what are you doing? What would you do next time? How did this happen? Even if a child doesn't have the vocabulary to respond back to you, you're kind of feeding them these critical thinking questions, getting them to think about thinking. We call this metacognition, just asking them questions about what it is that they're doing. And I
Wow.
would say one of the most overlooked things that a parent can do is allowing the child to struggle productively. So something like letting them master getting dressed by themselves independently. Yes, it's going to take you a little bit longer to get out the door, especially parents now. We're always in a hurry. We're really rushed, but just trusting your child and giving them that opportunity to tie their shoelaces or put their arm inside their jacket, it really does benefit the child in the long run, giving them these experiences.
Kind of also, from my perspective, it kind of gives them a bit more of that independence of understanding, when they get
Yes.
slightly older as well, that,
Yes.
when they move away from their parents, they can kind of understand and have those basic skills where they can kind of fend for themselves, essentially, right? Um,
Yeah.
That kind of feeds in really nicely to our next topic as well. So, with these routines and kinds of techniques you kind of talked about there to help children in their early years, there's also the milestones achieved through these as well, but then also the developmental delays that may also arise from them as well, which is
Yeah.
really interesting. It's kind of this idea that they have the milestone charts, and they
Yeah.
also have those can also create a bit of anxiety. So
Yes.
how should parents use these developmental milestones in a healthy way?
Okay, so milestones should be viewed as signposts and not stopwatches. Okay. They help us understand typical developmental patterns, and they can maybe help us identify when additional support might be needed or beneficial. But parents, they really need to take comfort in knowing that children develop at different rates. One child may learn to walk or speak earlier than another, and this is normal. Parents become anxious because they treat these milestones as deadlines rather than a range.
Right. So developmental milestones, deadlines or guidelines, you have answered it very perfectly. But a lot of parents, myself included, we have used milestone charts as deadlines. So my child should start talking by this age. My child should start crawling by 7 months, 6 months. My child should be sitting. I know developmental charts are there to help first-time parents, early childhood educators, and so on. But there are these milestones meant to be strict, rigid timelines or just general guides?
Yeah, I think the first step is just to know that development is not perfectly linear. In reality, children, they often move forward and progress in bursts. Then they might plateau, and then they might, progress again. Parents really need to trust their own instincts and intuition about their child. If you feel that something is consistently different or concerning, it's definitely worth discussing with a healthcare professional or some sort of developmental specialist, because early intervention is really incredibly valuable. The goal here is not to panic, it's to gather information using those milestones to gather information, and then you can seek support.
So, on the back of that, so at what point should parents become concerned about developmental delays then, Janine?
Sure. So, first, if there's a significant loss in previously acquired skills. So, if a child was able to do something independently or confidently, and they've regressed or it has stopped, that's something to note. If your child is making limited eye contact or having limited social engagement, a lack of response to sound or communication, even saying a child's name, or if you're pointing to something, referencing something, and you're saying it, and the child is not turning their attention, whether with their eyes or with their head, any sort of delayed language development, um, and persistent difficulties with movement or with coordination. These are things that you should look into.
Do you have any advice for parents who feel like there's something that isn't quite right?
I would say trust your instincts and know that seeking evaluation doesn't create a problem. It
Mhm.
helps clarify the support that's needed, if there is anything that's needed. So really take comfort in knowing that the earlier you make an intervention, the better the outcomes.
That's really
Right.
interesting. Thank
So, yeah. So, I think a lot of parents are also very worried about the labels that we give children. So, especially when it shapes their identity, their development. We've heard of the Pygmalion effect. So, it reminds us that expectations often influence outcomes. So, at the same time, parents tend to fear this clinical diagnosis such as ADHD, ASD, and so on. So, how can we help parents view labels not as limitations, but as tools of understanding, accessing support, and helping the children reach their potential?
Yes. So I often tell parents that the labels don't define their child. Their child has strengths, has challenges, has needs. A diagnosis simply helps us understand the child better. The right diagnosis can open doors for services, accommodations, therapies, and strategies that will ultimately help your child flourish. This is what we mean by when we say early interventions. The most important thing, as you said, is that we never reduce a child to the label. We start with their strengths, we start with their interests, we start with their relationships and their potential. The label simply just informs the support. It doesn't determine their future.
Mhm. And with those labels, do you think there's, an opportunity for them to also open doors and to support rather than limit the children, or do you think it's the other way?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there has been a lot of research showing that there's a statistically significant number of people who work in NASA who have dyslexia, or entrepreneurs who have dyslexia. We have to look at these things as simply this is the way that the child's brain is working, and the environment that they're in, whether or not it's supporting uh, how their brain is naturally working. So a school that is relying heavily on rote memorization, or traditional perhaps academics or teaching methodologies, that might be harder for a child that has, as Dr. Donwan had said, like ADHD or something, where the child needs to just physically move more or have a little bit more autonomy in how they want to progress through whatever tasks the teacher has put at hand. Parents need to try to support their child and find an environment that fits how the child's brain is working.
How from your perspective, how could parents keep the focus on the child's strengths rather than focusing on anything negative?
Yeah, children are very quick to pick up on whatever a parent is focusing on, or a teacher as well. So, whatever a parent is making a big deal about, the child will start to feel. So, parents want to be very mindful that they are shaping the child's inner voice. So, when you're focusing on the deficiencies or the weaknesses, the child starts to internalize that. So, the best thing that a parent could do, as you said, is focus on the child's strengths, praise them for the good choices that they're making, praise them for any progress that they're making. And progress might not look like academic success, or progress might not look like scoring well on a test. Progress might be your child showed a lot of effort. Your
Mhm.
child took your child a lot of focus to be able to do that. Your child had to sit still for a long time to do that. Really recognizing that is a strength, and that is something that your child's working on. So just focus on these milestones, no matter how small or insignificant they may seem to your child. Your praise and your attention is means the world to them. So just focus on these little bits step by step, and keep encouraging them and keep telling them to persevere, and they will.
Yeah, no doubt. Parents play a significant role in child's development. And at the same time, parents are also much aware of these developmental delays, and so is inclusive education becoming more important globally. Can you tell us a little about where ideas like inclusion and child-centered learning originated, and how do they continue to evolve today?
Yeah, I'm sure you've all heard of the pioneer, Maria Montessori. A lot of parents are familiar with Montessori, but they don't actually know where it began. And it started with children who were uh, rejected or excluded from the traditional setting. So we don't know what diagnosis these children may or may not have had, but they were not included. So Maria Montessori, she quickly discovered that these children, they learn best through active engagement rather than passive instruction. And just so we all know what passive instruction is when a teacher or a mentor is just telling you information, and a child is just receiving the information. They act as a receptacle for the information. Maria quickly realized that when children are actively involved in their learning, physically involved with their learning, they have much better outcomes. And I would say this is really where the Finnish system has embraced these principles,
Mm,
by building schools around equity, inclusion, and respect for individual differences.
mm. That's really, really interesting because it's so much about the engagement of the children, isn't it? About how we can engage with them and educate them through that as well. And that comes on really nicely to our next segment, which is kind of looking at that cultural Finnish kind of impact. So, from your perspective, what makes Finnish early childhood education different from many other systems around the world? You kind of touched upon it there in terms of some of the things that they focus on, but what is it that from that makes them stand out?
Yeah, I would say focusing on ensuring that every child feels like they belong. The Finnish approach fundamentally sees childhood as a very valuable stage in life. It's not preparation for school. You're preparing your child for life.
I think you've put that very aptly. You're preparing your children for life. So I'm just curious to know, is it the curriculum, is it the mindset, or is it the culture that makes it
Yeah, a lot.
different from other
Yeah,
systems
yeah.
in the world?
A lot of people, they assume that it's, the curriculum, but I would say it's actually the mindset. The mindset is that Finnish education starts with the simple belief that childhood has value in and of its own right. And the goal there, it's not to accelerate a child towards academics, it's actually slow down and to help children become capable, confident, and well-rounded, going back to holistic, a well-rounded human being. And this happens through building relationships, play, exploration, and these meaningful experiences. We don't need to rush the childhood. It's a very valuable time period. You only get one. You only get one childhood.
Absolutely, and absolutely. And from that, what do you think that surprises parents the most?
I don't know if it surprises them the most or if it confuses them the most, is
Hmm.
that I keep talking about how play is fundamental for all of these things. And parents, they need to understand that not all play is necessarily free play. So I've been talking about play kind of throughout this podcast, and the Finnish teaching methodologies is really about guided play, which is play with a purpose. Parents, they tend to think that play is free play, which, children are just running around and there's no sort of structure. We're talking about people setting up a environment where learning is fully supported.
Hmm.
I like how you've put that guided play. I'm sure a lot of work goes in preparing such lessons or activities just surrounding guided play. So, play is an important part of childhood. Parents are encouraged to play with their children, early childhood educators play with their children. And how is this so powerful for learning as an overall?
Yeah, well, they say that play is the learning. So, play is like helping the child make sense of the world through the simple act of play. Children are naturally developing language, developing creativity, developing problem solving skills. They're collaborating. They're getting those self regulation skills we were talking about with the executive functioning. They're having to navigate so much and they're doing it in a natural way. I always talk about when I'm meeting with parents how parents love taking their children to the beach because children just will, entertain themselves, so to speak. A well thought out classroom environment will do the same thing as taking your child to the beach. When a child enters a classroom that has been designed for them, where they feel welcomed and safe and secure, and the materials are at their level for them, designed for them, the children will naturally learn because the environment is one of the teachers. And the actual teacher, she's the guide on the side who's kind of guiding the children towards these milestones just through questioning and playing with them.
That's really, really interesting. And could you perhaps give us maybe an example, a beneficial element of play?
Yeah. So, there's a balance. I talked about free play where children can create their own rules, their own roles. And then there's guided play where the parent or the teacher can kind of facilitate the development towards a particular skill. I kind of like to think of it as the child doesn't know that they're learning, but the teacher or the parent, by asking them questions, can kind of be guiding them towards something. So, like a typical example would be a child's in a play box. and like a sandbox, and the parent or the teacher could be asking like, oh, can you make me a cupcake? And the child makes a cupcake, and then, oh, can you make one for another one of our friends? How many cupcakes do we have? We have 2 cupcakes now. Oh, I ate mine. How many cupcakes do I have left? Because you're adults, that we were talking about addition and subtraction. But a
Yeah.
child, when they're in the moment, in the sandbox, playing, thinking about cupcakes, they don't realize that you've actually just taught them about addition and subtraction. Simple
Mm.
games, even show and tell. When a teacher asks your child to bring in an item from home to do the game of show and tell, that child is actually developing confidence, developing
Mhm.
language skills, using vocabulary, so many things that they're doing. But to the child, they just think that they're playing a game of show and tell.
Right. So as a mom, I can totally relate to this because we do, my daughter and I have a lot of experience doing role plays. For example, she likes to play the role of a teacher, the role of a cashier, and so on.
Love that.
So she doesn't realize, but learning takes place implicitly. She doesn't know she's learning, of course, but
Yes.
asking questions like WH, what is this? How much is this? And so on. So learning takes place implicitly. And I like that this is all structured, guided form of play. But that brings me to the next question. Does this mean that unstructured play is slowly disappearing?
I think it goes back to a balance, because unstructured play does have value when children get to navigate social situations that parents or teachers couldn't have possibly predicted. A classic example is in an unstructured play. Maybe a child, if we go back to the sandbox, has built a sandcastle, and then another child comes around and steps on it. The teacher couldn't have created or planned that, but it's an amazing situation for a child to learn relationship skills, to learn how to handle failure, to learn how to handle disappointment. These are just as important as the academic skills that we were talking about earlier. And this can really only happen in an unstructured, kind of playful environment where children can navigate these social situations, and also their own emotional responses to
Mhm.
these types of situations.
Yeah. It really kind of, in some kind of way, sets them up in a sort of kind of realistic environment, right? Of like kind of scenarios which will come up in later in their years as well as when they start to grow older as well. Um, how do you respond to parents who worry that play means that children are falling behind?
I would tell them that research suggests the opposite. It
Hmm.
really does. Children who experience rich, play-based early childhood environments, they develop stronger long-term learning dispositions, creativity, motivation, social and emotional skills. Uh, we see this later in life when we see the PISA scores coming out so high in Finland, knowing that they don't start the traditional academics. The formal learning to read and write is not happening until 7 years old. In a lot of countries, this is shocking, but they really invest in those early years to expose children to a range of environments and experiences, and focus on that emotional and social well-being.
Yeah. So that's really shocking and surprising because when you say formal learning doesn't take place until a child is 7, but I should be feeling guilty because in Malaysia, formal learning actually happens 4 or 5, and they already know how to do the entire words, phonics. So is that what you mean by formal learning? Are we on the same page with that?
Yeah, so basically in Finland, I don't want to say that there's no traditional academics. Traditional academics are happening, but it's happening through this sort of guided play. So, a child will, be learning the basics of phonics, but it'll be playful, like a child learning the sounds of their name, the sounds of their friends, certain vocabulary words. There's less emphasis on the paper and pencil, certainly not workbooks happening in the early years, because we're trying to capitalize on that 0 to 5 period. There's only so many hours in the day. If I had to choose how to allocate a child's time, I would spend that time developing the executive functioning skills and developing a child's social and emotional well-being rather than focusing on the memorization. Because just because a child can memorize things at 4 or 5 years old, is it necessarily required? That's kind of the conversation that we're having. And I see this a lot in my company at Capina. We have had to adapt. There are certain cultural expectations, and absolutely, we need to prepare children for the environment that they are going into. We need to prepare them to enter the society that they will live in. So we don't want to change that, and we don't want to condemn traditional academics. We just want to have a balance. We want a
Mhm.
balance between play and a balance between the traditional academics, and try to find a way, how can we prime a child for big school? Well, we can do it by setting the foundation for executive functioning and early exposure to academics.
So, Janine, you mentioned something about cultural expectations. You rightfully put that, because here in Malaysia, or maybe in other Asian countries as well, there's a lot of emphasis that's given to formal schooling or traditional schooling. In fact, Malaysia has just lowered primary school age to 6 years old. That means children will go to school at 6. So at 4 and 5, they're expected to know words. They are expected to know 3-letter words, basic addition, subtraction. In fact, my daughter is turning 5 soon, and she's already doing addition, mathematics, subtraction. She already know her ABCs. So she does a lot of spelling. And I think after this conversation, I'm going to be very guilty, because my daughter comes home with a list of vocabulary that she has to memorize, and I actually help her memorize. So she was memorizing a couple of words: paper, PAPR, and all the other words that she had on that list.
Yeah.
So I feel at the same time, as I want to prepare her for formal schooling, but at the same time, I don't want to push her too hard. So how do parents encourage independence?
Well, first of all, don't feel guilty, because you rightfully are preparing your child for her next situation, and her next environment will be big school, and she will have these expectations. I think what you're doing is exactly correct, and that is, you're having a meaningful connection with your child when she comes home with these materials. So, to her, to you, that you're helping her memorize something for school, but to her, she's having this amazing time where she gets one-on-one attention from her mom. They're doing something that her teacher has focused a lot on. So automatically she's thinking, this is important. This brings a lot of joy to my teacher. I look forward to these moments with my mommy where I have her complete undivided attention. We're doing this together. So I would say, if your child enjoys these moments, there's absolutely nothing wrong, because to her, that is play. So I guess when we're talking about a thriving child, is for parents to just think about, how can I take this moment and make it joyful? And if it's having this special connection with my child, maybe it's doing homework in a cozy place. Maybe it's, you can have some sort of music happen, like whatever it is that your child is naturally into or excited about, or whatever motivates them. Just lean into that and recognize when your child is feeling frustrated. And usually for the early years, frustration means tears, withdrawing, or maybe even some sort of aggression. Really early years could even be like biting, teething. This is frustration. And the best thing that you could do is just say, I recognize that you're frustrated. Give your child the words to describe how they're feeling. I recognize you're frustrated. I recognize that this is hard. I want to help you do this so that you're ready for year 1, or whatever it is. Explain to your child, yes, I know that this is hard. I'm here to help you. I'm here to help you because this is important. And take breaks. So if you have a child that can only focus for a certain amount of time, do it in small steps. It's okay. Don't feel bad about preparing your child for the environment that they're going into. Take comfort in knowing that You can easily reframe it into a playful situation. The best thing that you can do is sit with your child, smile, and the rest will take care of itself.
That's a relief to hear.
So that's some really nice advice, I think, for, kind of reaffirming the parents, they're doing a good job. And if they continue just to kind of have that positive attitude,
Yes.
and that's the main thing, that they're actively being proactive with that. So with the just kind of to wrap up this section of the podcast, just want to go
Yeah,
back a little bit to the kind of cultural element. So
sure.
obviously, comes to no shock that not every country in the world has Finland's resources or culture. So what aspect of the Finnish model can be realistically adopted anywhere, do you think?
Yeah, so I think autonomy with a child is probably one of the biggest Finnish principles, and autonomy starts with trust. And that would mean giving your child opportunities to participate in their own lives. I know it sounds silly, but these simple examples like choosing their own clothing, helping prepare meals, feeding themselves,
Mhm.
solving small problems, um, just managing age appropriate responsibilities, cleaning up, wiping a table, pushing their chair back in, pressing the button on an elevator, expressing their opinions, allowing a child to express their opinion and then validating that opinion and respecting that opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. And that kind of like it goes into our next kind of topic, which is more looking at the future and the skills in education. So, what
Yeah.
skills do you think children will need most in the future? And do you think that we're preparing them for those skills today?
The future obviously is difficult to predict, but there's certain human skills that are going to become increasingly valuable. And maybe you've heard of them, 21st century skills. But for those of you that don't know, it's creativity, critical thinking, collaboration, communication. Recently added to this is citizenship and character. This is the 6 C's.
Mhm.
At the root of all of this is your ability to adapt, your ability to show empathy, and your ability to be resilient. These are the core skills.
Yeah, you very rightfully put that because there's a lot of skill gap that's being, I mean, if you look at the research, a lot of people are talking about skill gap and so on. So we're now not only raising Gen Zs, but soon we are raising Alpha. My daughter is Gen Alpha and Gen Beta has come in. And the way they learn is different from the way we have learned or our parents have learned. So we have to start being very adaptive. And you talk about the six
Yeah.
C's, I think
Mhm. Yeah.
generally, as early childhood educators, and we are preparing our early childhood educators for a future classroom. So,
Yeah.
which of these do you think will stand out the most? Which of these will matter the most?
Yeah, I would say that educators will increasingly become facilitators of learning rather than just transmitters of information. Okay. So, teachers, you will need to have emotional intelligence. You will need to have coaching skills. You will need to have cultural competency. This is a big one. Digital literacy, relationship building abilities, and teachers themselves need to be highly adaptable. You can't replace this human connection between a teacher and a child. It's actually going to become more important and not less.
And do you think with our current systems, do you think that's encouraging those skills enough?
Well, again, it goes back to, the use of time. So if children are spending so much time with the memorization and the traditional academics, they're spending less time developing the emotional intelligence and, building up resiliency for when things don't go their way. So I would say you have to find the balance from society's expectations and what you actually believe, like what values does your family have, and just try to frame it that way.
So, Jenny, I don't want to open a can of worms, but a lot of parents
It's
think that
okay.
I feel like a lot of parents talk about helping their children adapt for the world that's to come, especially now we transition to AI and we see a lot of AI these days and more to come in years to come. So what do you think about this? Is AI skill an important skill in children?
Yeah, look, AI has enormous potential. It's undeniable. It can reduce administrative workload. It can personalize learning experiences. It can provide teachers, educators with really, really valuable insights. When we go back to one of the first questions you were asking me about these, developmental milestones and the checklists, AI can certainly help detect outliers and can provide suggestions for early interventions. This is what really excites me. It's giving teachers the opportunity to have more time to focus on the humanistic matter of teaching, which is building relationships with the students and supporting children. What concerns me though is it can be an over reliance on AI. I think that children still need the human interaction. They need the play. They need movement, physical
Mm,
movement, and
mm,
real world experiences. So technology is not going to take this away. It should be enhancing human development and not replacing it.
Mhm. And in terms of that, you kind of touched on some of our questions there in terms of what you're excited and what worries you. But when it comes to those worry points, what is it in terms of like where should we draw those boundaries and how should we help support children who may engage with AI? How do we, even as parents, support children through that?
Yeah, it's not in the early years, it's not so much AI like, and children in the early years are not going to be entering prompts and have AI writing essays for them. This is definitely something that's going to be affecting uh, high school, university level situations. But for the early years, it's more about teacher support, and children should be aware that there is an amazing tool of AI. Technology is there to help us, especially children who, going back to children who have challenges or any sort of neurodiversity. Technology can be a fantastic tool. You have speech to text. You
Mhm.
have apps that will read text out loud to you. These things are phenomenal and there to help and support the child. But AI is not going to replace the human relationships, the play experiences, promote the critical thinking, the emotional development, and the most importantly is ethical decision making. So these are conversations that parents can be having with their children, even in the early years. Just talking about, was this a good choice? What can you do next time? Developing the empathy. I think Dr. Dahl, when you talked about how your daughter, she likes to do role play, pretend to be a teacher or a shopkeeper or a doctor. These are great opportunities to talk about ethics, even
mm.
at a child's level. Um, and to really like focus on empathy. This interaction cannot be replaced by AI.
Mm.
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head with AI. But from a research POV, a lot of research on AI focuses on higher education or even secondary education. There's very little focus on how AI can support teachers or caregivers in at the early childhood education level. See, you spoke about neurodivergent kids, how
Yeah,
speech to text can help them and so on. It's just that teachers do not receive enough exposure on how AI can help them with intervention or even with teaching or even supporting children. So this is where I think more support should be given to early childhood educators in terms of AI. So
absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the great thing is you could actually take that whole statement and put that into a prompt, and AI could probably give suggestions. I think that as long as teachers see this as a tool to help them understand topics that may be difficult or new for them, but it's not replacing the knowledge. And something that I'm working on even with my own children is just how to check the sources. So when
Mm,
AI is giving you information, you have to critically think and go back and validate those
mm,
sources. This is really where the critical thinking is going to come to play in the later years.
right.
I think that's a really nice point to end that section on and kind of feed into our final point. Janine, if parents were listening today and remember one thing just about raising thriving children, what would it be and why?
Uh, Children, they're not projects to be perfected. They are little people to be nurtured. And the greatest gift that we could give children is a strong relationship with them, a sense of belonging, and the freedom to become who they're meant to be.
That's really nice. I really like that.
So, Janine, in the beginning, I mentioned this African proverb that it takes a village to raise a child. So, if you could leave early childhood educators who are helping parents raise children these days or caregivers, what message would it be?
To raise a thriving child, you need to give children opportunities to apply the scientific method, to learn through trial and error. Let children feel safe to make mistakes. Our job as parents, educators, is not to prevent children from ever making a mistake, but to actually teach children how to respond to making mistakes.
And learn from the mistakes. Right.
Absolutely. We learn through mistakes. We learn by doing. And when we do things, we might fail.
Yeah, you see, we are not perfect ourselves. We falter, we fail, but sometimes we expect too much from our children, and
Yeah.
then that's also not fair to them. So thank you, Janine.
Thank you so much for having me. I really loved this. There were great questions.
Yeah, thank you so much, both of you, for your insights today. And that's all we have time on the Next in Education podcast. It's been a real pleasure. And if there's one takeaway from today, it's that early years matter more than we often realize. And shaping those years requires skilled, compassionate, and well-prepared educators. I'm just going to open the floor now for Dr. Darwin just to talk a little bit about the Bachelor in Early Childhood Education program here at GlobalNxt University.
So the School of Education has recently launched the Bachelor of Early Childhood Education, and I think this session has really helped covered a lot of essential parts of the early childhood education, such as the Montessori method. Of course, there are other methods that we'll be covering in classrooms, such as the Waldorf method. And as we prepare our educators for a global classroom, we're very excited for this journey. So if you're passionate about working with young children and believe that you have the power of early learning to shape future generations, our early childhood education is designed for you.
As Dr. Darwin says, if any of our listeners are actually interested, please visit our website at globalnext.edu.my or get in contact with us via our socials to point you in the right direction. Thank you all so much for listening to today's episode. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe, share it with somebody passionate about education, and please join us next time. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you so much.